It's Dr. Lori. I'm at the lovely boutique markets in Orlando, Florida. Come thrift with me. This is mid-century modern, if you haven't figured this out. I'm sure you have. Basically, it's quintessentially designed from all over the world. It's really a global interest following World War II. This is Arne Jacobsen style, emphasis on the style. You know, I always talk about how I'm Sports Illustrated swimsuit model style. I have all the same parts of those girls, but I'm not a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. These are not Arne Jacobsen, but they're that style. And that style is Scandinavian design. These are called egg chairs. And these particular chairs have a reference to actual wing chairs. Old-fashioned wing chairs, you've seen them in your grandmother's house, you know? So they've got these appendages that come out on the sides, which basically the idea in the early 1800s was for the wing to actually keep the drafts away from you when you sat in this chair. This is the same form or the same idea, only it's sped up into the mid-century modern time period. So they're Arne Jacobsen style. If you look at the chrome at the bottom, you can see that at the bottom is a very typical modern style support. If you look at the color says, oh, I'm from the later part of the 20th century, not from the 1950s and 60s, but later on. And that's important to note. The color is, in fact, coral in this type of color is not a color that we would typically see in the 1960s. You'd see it later on in the century. The other thing that you want to do is you want to look for things like staining, right? Now you could put a pillow there and cover that up, not a big deal. I think cleaning it would be difficult. Pilly, if it's pilly, you want to make sure that you are looking at that too. That also could be cleaned up. But at this point, you know, the price point on this, I think, is low, so they're saying, hey, you know, it is as is. I always say if you can remove the cushion, look at the cushion, feel the cushion, see if the cushion is actually sort of the same thickness all the way around. This one is. And then see if you can find a label. I bet this zipper surprised you. You can actually unzip this and you could have purchased new ones, new cushions, covers if you wanted to, okay? So you see that. Sometimes if you look at that, what was under the cushion, look at the difference in color from, of course, the underside versus the back. So the underside is really, really the real color that it always was. And then you can see. And in certain parts of the country where there's all kinds of sunshine, you're going to see that some of these fabrics get more faded, right? But this one is in good condition and it has a pair. So I want you to remember that it has a pair as part of a set. That's going to be reflected in the value and in the price. So here's the set. Here's the second one. This one's back here. And this one, if you lift up that same cushion, this cushion is thicker and harder, and this cushion also has a label on it. So this cushion gives you a little bit of information about the distributor. It also gives you information about the fact that the piece was made in China, and it is in those design styles of the Scandinavian designer Arne Jacobsen. So these are the big Scandinavian designers of the 1960s for the look, for the shape, for the style. But they're reproductions and they're produced, of course, abroad in Asia. So it's a nice form. It looks like it's in good shape. However, let's take a look at price. Egg chairs in the style of Arne Jacobsen, so I got that right. First introduced in 1958. This is a recent version, that's right. For the pair, it's $1,500. So they're worth about, let's say, $750 each. They added another $50 for the fact that you've got two, because getting two is not all that easy. If you bought an actual egg chair by Arne Jacobsen, you'd be talking $12,000 for one. Oh gosh, Dr. Lori, $12,000 for one, can't afford that. So then the $1,550 for the two that are reproductions, pretty darn good. Then you have this lamp. Usually when you see these typical 1960s shades, and that's what these are, they're typical 1960s shades. And whenever you see these shades, usually they are on a natural formed table lamp. And a natural formed table lamp, that might be a piece of wood, it might be a bark of a trunk of a tree, but it's typically not metal like this. I do think that this piece is the 50s and the shades are the 50s. I don't think that these particular shades went on this particular lamp, but I do think they're both from the same period. So we've got a little bit of that situation. I like the fact that you have different tones. It's, of course, brass, then it's got the black column in the center. It's got this nice swirl Organic forms and swirled forms, really typical in that late 1950s time period. I think it looks great with these chairs. How much do they want for this? I want $5.50 for this with all three shades. The shades are about $75 a shade. So that's $150 plus $75 for those three shades. So the shades are expensive. The floor lamp should be about $150. So you're right around the mark on that, a little bit high on that. I would like it better if this metal, first of all, wasn't metal, but if this metal was the same silver-toned metal color as the chrome in the bottom of the chairs. I think it would look really great. But for I'm trying to make a mid-century modern look, really good design pieces for my living room or my study, this is a nice set. A lot of you know a lot about mid-century modern. One of the things about the vintage middle of the 20th century modern pieces is something called exoticism. That's images, artwork, and design pieces from faraway places. So everything from, Moroccan rugs to Turkish ottomans, all different types of things, and artwork that looks like it's from other places. So all the American GIs go all over the world fighting, of course, World War II, and they come back and they bring these unusual exotic things back to the United States. So that becomes a design component in the 1950s and 60s. So this piece is a good example. They're calling it 70s Tiki art, which I think is kind of interesting. You can see that with these elements, which are supposed to identify different rocks, different stones, you can see like coral and of course like onyx and tiger's eye and chalcedony and turquoise and such. They're supposed to look like that. They're three-dimensional. They're called bas-relief. When anything comes out from a two-dimensional work of art, it's called bas-relief. So they're in walnut frames, very typical of the 1960s, the walnut frame. The furniture is walnut, the frames are walnut, everything's walnut. Dark woods, very popular, and you can see it's got a texture, sort of this burlap texture on the background. I want $275 for the pair. They're worth $500 for the pair. They're very desirable, they're really unique, and they're beautiful. And then Asian pieces, traditional Asian pieces. The other thing that was really interesting in the 1950s and 60s was this interest in having fine art in our homes in the United States. So what they did, because they didn't have all of the great art of Europe, but many people saw the great art of Europe, these particular pieces, paint by numbers became popular. So paint by numbers started to look toward giving Americans an idea of, we can have these types of works of art in our home. And that's what these are. So still exotic places, of course, the Japanese figures, and they are all done by paint by numbers. You can tell that by the way you don't really have an outline. One color sort of just goes into the next color. And as you remember, if you ever did paint by numbers, they give you a number and they say, okay, number 1 is green, number 2 is blue, number 3 is whatever. And you just keep going through it. So you can become an artist really without any training because you just follow the colors. But these are also representative of the very famous, of course, geisha, and also, of course, the very famous figural tradition in Japanese art. Some people say it reminds them of woodblock prints. Doesn't remind me of a woodblock print. When you put down a woodblock print, you see the actual grain of the wood. This, you can tell, is, of course, the paint by numbers. So they're nice. And notice them. This is something that I always try to point out about when you see a figure of a man and a woman. They should be looking toward the other one. So in this case, sort of like a ladies before gentlemen kind of thing. The woman is looking, of course, in the direction of the man, and he's looking back, as if they are a unit. If they're not a unit or they're not looking that way, then you don't necessarily have to buy them as a pair. But these are intended to be a pair, and they're presented as a pair, and the seller has them as a pair. So if you have that opportunity, take advantage of it, because you increase value when you have a set or a pair by 10%. Now, what do they want? They're in more contemporary frames. These are not typical frames of the 1960s. What do they want on this? They want $88 for the pair, so that makes $44 for each. I would say that they're worth $50 each, maybe even $55 each. So that's a bargain for the two of them, because you're getting a little bit of a deal for buying them both. Make sure you buy them both if you have the opportunity. If you're wondering why I wear the gloves, and I always wear the gloves, it's because I don't own any of these objects, and the oils on my hands can be transferred to objects, attract dirt, and deteriorate those objects over time. Once an object's deteriorated, it's devalued, so you don't want to do that. So that's why I wear the gloves. People go, she's a germaphobe, she doesn't want to touch anything. I'm not really a germaphobe. Basically, I want to make sure we're protecting objects that don't belong to me. And I left it all for you. There's more videos to come.